Chapter 1. Introduction. Nightfall in the Eternal City. It is 1 hour past sunset in the year 121, and the largest city on Earth is going blind. 1 million people. Almost no light. From the Aventine Hill, Rome at night is not a city of marble at all. It is a black sea, pricked here and there by a single trembling flame. The river keeps moving in the dark, the way it has for longer than the city has had a name. Down on the wharves, the barges creak against their ropes. And up on the hill, in one particular house, the evening ritual is beginning. Tonight we are going to follow one man, a senator, a husband, a tired public servant with aching feet through every quiet hour between sunset and sleep. But here is the part that still puzzles people, and it puzzled me too. This man can afford anything, chests of silver, rooms he has never bothered to count, and yet he will end this night by his own choice in a windowless cell, barely larger than a pantry, on a bed narrower than an army cot, in darkness so complete he will not be able to see his own hand. Why would the richest man in the neighborhood sleep in the smallest, darkest, plainest room in his own house? Historians have an answer, and it is stranger and more sensible than you might guess. We will get there, but not until we have lived through his whole evening first. Before we settle in, if you enjoy what we do here, a like or a subscribe genuinely helps us keep making these long, quiet journeys into the past. And if you remember evenings before air conditioning kerosene lamps at the farmhouse, blackout curtains during the war, the particular quiet of a house before television, I would especially love to hear those memories in the comments tonight. This episode belongs to you more than most. So dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum our Roman would have envied it. Pour something warm. Get comfortable. Tonight we are going to learn how to fall asleep like a Roman. Let's ease into it together. Chapter 2. A Roman senator comes home at dusk. His name is Lucius Caecilius Rufus. He is 55 years old, and at this particular moment, he wants exactly one thing in the entire world: to get his sandals off. He has been awake since before dawn. He has stood through 3 hours of speeches in the Senate House, one of which was his own, and 2 of which, in his private opinion, should never have been delivered at all. His feet ache. His back aches. The litter sways beneath him as 4 tired men carry him up the hill, and he keeps the curtain cracked open an inch, watching his own street arrive. The doors of his house open before he reaches them, because the doorkeeper, an old Greek named Philon, who has worked this entrance for 30 years, heard the litter-bearer's footsteps 2 streets away, and knows their rhythm the way you might know a family member's knock. Lucius steps down onto the paving stones, nods to the bearers, and crosses his own threshold right foot first. Not because he is forgetful, because he is Roman, and a Roman does not enter his house on the left foot. Some habits are older than the reasons for them. Inside, the atrium is already half dark. This is the grand public heart of the house, the room where, this very morning, 40 men stood waiting for him. They were his clients, shopkeepers, a school teacher, 2 veterans, a widow's son, all of them bound to him by favors given and favors owed, all of them arriving at dawn to greet him, ask for help, and walk him down to the forum like a small private parade. That obligation runs in both directions, and it runs his whole life. But the morning crowd is 12 hours gone now, and the room has gone quiet enough to hear the fountain trickling 2 rooms away. The first ritual of the evening is getting out of the toga, and it is a genuine production. A senator's toga is a single piece of wool, roughly 18 feet long, wrapped and draped and folded around the body in a configuration that takes 2 trained men to assemble correctly. It weighs as much as a winter overcoat. It is hot, it is heavy, it cannot be put on alone, and there is real scholarly debate about whether anyone could so much as visit a latrine in one without an engineering consultation. Lucius stands with his arms slightly raised, like a man being measured for a suit, while the great cloth comes off him in slow revolutions. You can watch his shoulders drop an inch as it goes. Then comes the moment he has been thinking about since roughly noon. A young woman named Chloe kneels in front of his chair with a basin of warmed water, lifts his feet in one at a time, and washes off the day. The grit of the forum, the dust of the sacred way, the faint grime of a city of 1 million people who share their streets with mules, market stalls, and open drains. Anyone who has come home from a double shift on a factory floor and peeled their boots off knows something about this exact feeling. The Romans simply refused to feel guilty about enjoying it. And now, before we follow him any deeper into the house, stop and notice the thing that is hardest for a modern person to actually feel: the darkness. The lamp burning in that corridor niche produces about as much light as a single birthday candle. That is not a poetic exaggeration. That is the measured output of a 1-wick olive oil lamp. The richest man on this hill, in the richest city of the ancient world, lives his entire night inside little amber bubbles of candlelight, each one a few feet wide with oceans of true blackness in between. Every evening of his life is, by our standards, a power outage. He has never known anything else, and this is the part worth sitting with, he does not experience it as darkness. He experiences it as evening. When his household wants real light for a dinner party, for reading, for the hour of accounts, they do it the only way possible. They gang lamps together. 5 flames on a bronze stand, 10. A rich house might own several hundred lamps, and there were dinner parties in the city lit by more flames than that, every one of them needing oil, a trimmed wick, and a watchful slave. Those of you who remember trimming kerosene lamps on the farm before the power lines came through know the chore exactly: the wick that smokes if it is too long, the glass that blacks over, the smell. Multiply that by 40 every single night, forever. Light in this world is not a switch. Light is a staff position. Lucius, barefoot now and dressed in a soft house tunic that feels like forgiveness after the toga, pauses at the edge of the atrium pool. The roof above it is open to the sky. It has always been open. That is the design, a rectangle of heaven set into the ceiling to catch rainwater in the pool below. By day, it lights the room. By night, it does something better. It hands him the stars, framed in private, like a skylight built 600 years before anyone thought to call it that. The water at his feet holds a second, trembling copy of them. He stands there for a moment, not because he is contemplating eternity, but because his feet are clean and the stone is cool, and nobody is asking him for anything. While Lucius stargazes, the house is sealing itself around him, and the ceiling is worth watching, because a Roman front door was a fortification with manners. Philon swings the great double doors shut and drops the bar, a squared beam of oak that slides into iron brackets, the same technology that holds a barn shut for the same reasons. Then the lock, and yes, there were locks, proper ones, iron tumbler locks with bronze keys, some small enough that Romans wore house keys on finger rings. Archaeologists have recovered thousands of them. Along with the pessimistic hardware, they guarded door chains, window grills, strongbox padlocks. This is a city, after all. The elder Pliny remarks dryly that the burglar's trade kept locksmiths in business, and one Pompeian householder set into his entrance floor a mosaic of a snarling, chained dog with a 2-word caption every schoolchild still learns: "Beware the dog." Security systems, warning signage, deadbolts. The kit was complete before the Empire was. The last component of the system circles its mat 3 times by the door and lies down with a sigh. Cerberus, because Romans named their dogs with the same wit they named everything else. And a one-headed Cerberus was apparently irresistible, a brindled mastiff of the old Molossian breed, the kind the farm writers recommended for house duty. Big, black and tan, loud at night and friendly by day. He is fed at nightfall, on professional advice we have already heard, so that he loves the house. Between the bar, the lock, the dog, and the doorkeeper's cell beside the entrance, the house at night was a closed circuit, and the dog was its alarm. Those of you who grew up with a farm dog, sleeping on the porch, the one who knew the sound of your own truck from a stranger's half a mile off, knew the Roman security system personally. It has never been improved. It has only been electrified. In the corner of the atrium stands a small shrine, built like a doll-sized temple, and inside it live the household gods, the Lares, little dancing bronze figures with drinking horns raised. To Lucius, they are not decoration, and not exactly theology either. They are the house itself, its luck and its memory, and they have been fed and greeted every day of his life, and his father's life, and his grandfather's. Tonight, as on every night, someone will leave them a little offering: grain, a splash of wine, a sprig of rosemary. The historians among you will note correctly that we cannot know precisely what this family believed in their hearts, but we know they kept the flame fed. That tells you something on its own. From the atrium, he walks back through the house toward the peristyle, the colonnaded garden at the private heart of the property, where the family's real evening happens, far from the street and the front door and everyone else's business. A Roman house is built like the man who owns it, a formal public face out front, and the genuine life kept deeper in, behind doors that visitors never pass. The deeper you are allowed into the building, the more the family trusts you. Tonight we are going all the way in, and later tonight, that little walk will take us right up to the door of the strangest room in the house, the tiny dark one. Hold that thought. We are not ready for it yet. There is a reason, beyond the view, that money in Rome lived uphill, and on a night like this, you can watch the reason forming. Down along the river, a thin, pale fog is pooling over the low districts, and the Romans, centuries before anyone saw a microbe, had concluded with grim, empirical accuracy that the low, damp, mosquito-humming air near the marshes made people sick. The medical writers ranked neighborhoods by their air. The farm authors cited villas by the same doctrine. And the summer fevers that climbed out of the wetlands every year killed enough Romans that the city had a goddess of fever with her own temples, placated annually in the oldest spirit of, if you can't cure it, flatter it. The science underneath was wrong. Bad air, malaria, the very phrase, but the map was right. Height meant health. Lucius's grandfather paid a fortune for this hilltop. He believed he was buying his descendants' lungs, and in a roundabout way, he was. Out in the garden, the city noise has thinned to almost nothing. Up here on the Aventine, behind thick walls, with a household settling around him like a ship battening down for the night, Lucius can hear 3 things: the fountain, the wind in the cypress trees, and somewhere below the hill, faint as memory, the river. The Tiber has carried grain barges all day. Now it carries Moonlight. He lowers himself onto a stone bench that still holds a little of the afternoon's warmth. The Romans knew exactly which benches did this. The way you know the warm spot in a farmhouse kitchen. And for the first time since before sunrise, Lucius Cecilius Rufus does absolutely nothing at all. Chapter 3. Bronze lamps and olive oil, lighting a Roman house at night. The lamp is about the size of a closed fist, made of cheap pressed terracotta, and on its base there is a maker's stamp, a workshop name pressed into the wet clay before firing, because even in the 2nd century, somebody was building a brand. Lamps just like this one were turned out by the tens of thousands in factory workshops up north and shipped across the entire empire. Archaeologists have pulled identical ones out of the ground in Britain, in Africa, on the Rhine. It is, in other words, a mass-produced consumer good, the 60-watt bulb of the ancient world. And the hand holding it belongs to the one person in this house who thinks about light more than anyone else alive in it. His name is Felix. He is somewhere around 30. He himself is not certain of the year, and he was born in this house, in the slave quarters along the back wall, which makes him what the Romans called a verna, a home-born slave. We should say this plainly, because the warm lamplight makes it easy to forget. Felix is enslaved. He is the legal property of the man on the bench in the garden. That fact is the foundation this entire gentle evening is built on, and no honest tour of a Roman house gets to leave it out. Rome's quiet nights were manufactured, every single one of them, by people who did not get to choose their work. History asks us to hold both things at once, the beauty of the lamplight and the price of it. Felix's evening round is a craft, and like most crafts, it is invisible when done well. Every lamp in use needs its wick trimmed too long, and it smokes, streaking soot up the painted walls. Too short, and it drowns in its own oil and dies. Every lamp needs topping up because a single small lamp burns through its reservoir in a few hours. He moves through the house in a fixed order, the same order every night. The entrance lamp for the doorkeeper, the atrium, the corridor niches, the dining room, the master's study last, because the master will use it latest. He can do the whole circuit in the dark, which is fortunate because the dark is mostly what he has to work in. The fuel for all of this is olive oil, not the good stuff, which the kitchen guards jealously, but the third pressing, the bitter dregs of the harvest, bought by the amphora from dealers down at the river port. Lamp oil was to Roman lighting what kerosene was to the American farmhouse. Cheap enough to burn nightly, dear enough that nobody burned it carelessly. A house like this one might pour several gallons a week into its lamps. Across the river, behind the docks, the empty oil jars piled up so relentlessly that they formed an actual artificial hill of broken pottery, a hill you can still climb in Rome today, made of roughly 50 million discarded amphorae. The ancient world did not have light pollution, it had light logistics. There is a hierarchy of light in this house, and Felix administers it like a quartermaster. Terracotta lamps, a few coppers apiece, for corridors and kitchens. Bronze lamps, worth a workman's weekly wage, for rooms where guests recline. For the truly special evening, beeswax candles, sweet burning, clean, and so expensive they were a respectable gift at the winter festival of Saturnalia. Tallow candles existed too, rendered from animal fat, and they stank like a kitchen accident. They were for people with no choice and no guests. If you grew up in a house where the good lamps came out when company called, you already understand Roman lighting better than most textbooks do. While Felix works his circuit, the kitchen is performing the opposite ritual, putting fire to bed. The cook, a formidable woman named Thais, who runs her smoky little kingdom with absolute authority, banks the hearth, sweeping the coals into a tight mound and capping them with a ceramic cover so they will smolder, starved and patient, until morning. Matches will not exist for another 17 centuries. If every flame in this house dies tonight, somebody starts tomorrow striking sparks off flint into dry tinder, which is a fine way to ruin a morning. The banked hearth is the house's pilot light, and covering it properly is a small act on which the whole next day depends. One more lamp hangs over the city, and it is the only one nobody has to fill: the moon. We have lost, under our orange streetlight haze, any feeling for what the moon meant as municipal infrastructure. But the Romans planned by it, the way we plan by weather. A full moon lit the streets, end to end, bright enough to walk by, dine out by, travel by, and host timed dinner parties to it, so their guests could get home without hiring torches. The politest invitations, the etiquette implies, simply followed the calendar. The dark of the moon, by contrast, belonged to the careful and the criminal, in roughly equal numbers. For everything between, there were lanterns of translucent horn or scraped bladder guarding a candle stub, and pine-pitch torches that announced you to the whole street, which was partly the point. Light after dark in Rome was never just illumination. It was a statement of intent. Behind all this nightly care of flame lies a fear that every Roman carried in the back of the mind: fire. This is a city built of timber and packed close, a city that had already burned catastrophically more than once and would burn again. Down in the tenement districts, a knocked-over lamp on a straw mattress could erase 1,000 homes before sunrise. Rome's answer was the vigils, 7,000 men organized into watch cohorts, part night police and part fire brigade, patrolling the streets with buckets, axes, and the authority to break down your door if your chimney smoke looked wrong. We will meet them properly later tonight, out in the dark streets, where their footsteps are one of the sounds Lucius falls asleep to. For now, know this: in this world, a lamp is never just a lamp. It is a small, useful, domesticated catastrophe. The last stop on Felix's round is the master's study, where he sets down the best working lamp in the house, bronze, 2 wicks, twice the light, which is to say roughly 2 birthday candles now, and arranges it just so, at the left of the desk. Because the master is right-handed, and a shadow across the page helps no one, Felix cannot read the documents he is lighting. He knows their shapes, though: the tall stacks that mean estate accounts, the slim, elegant case that means the master will be reading philosophy tonight instead. He hopes, in a small, private way, for the philosophy. The accounts make the old man rub his eyes and stay up too late, and a household always knows when its master has slept badly. His rounds done, Felix allows himself 1 unauthorized minute. He leans against a column at the edge of the peristyle and looks at the same moon his master is looking at from the bench 40 feet away. And for that minute, the enormous legal gulf between the 2 men is not closed, never closed, but quiet. Roman law had a great deal to say about what Felix was. It said nothing about what he noticed: that the fountain changes its sound at night, that the 3rd column from the corner holds the day's warmth longest, that the moon on white marble is bright enough to walk by. the record of Felix's inner life is a blank page. We are imagining him, and we should admit it. But the Romans themselves carved one truth onto 10,000 tombstones, raised for people like him, that the people who kept these houses alive had names, and the names were remembered by somebody. And now, a smell drifts across the garden that ends Felix's stolen minute and lifts Lucius off his bench. Warm bread, sharp cheese, and the green bitterness of good olives. The household is laying out the evening's last meal. It will be a small one. The Romans did their serious eating earlier, but small is not the same as unimportant. And this gentle final table, eaten half outdoors with the moon over the colonnade, may be the most pleasant 20 minutes of the entire Roman day. It deserves its own chapter. Let's pull up a couch. Chapter 4. The Roman evening meal. Bread, wine, and quiet conversation. The loaf comes apart with a soft tearing sound, and the smell that rises from it, warm wheat, a little sour from the starter, a little smoky from the oven, is the smell of safety in every century that has ever had bread. It was baked this afternoon in a round pan, scored into 8 neat wedges like a wheel, the standard shape of the Roman loaf. We know this because the volcano at Pompeii preserved dozens of them, carbonized mid-afternoon, some still sitting in their ovens, one of them stamped with the name of the slave who baked it. Lucius tears off a wedge, dips it in coarse salt, and eats it standing up, before anyone has even reclined, which his grandfather would have considered the collapse of civilization, in which he considers the privilege of being 55 in his own house. Across the table, already settled on her couch with the unhurried authority of someone who has run this household for 26 years, is his wife, Antonia. She is 48. She was married to him at 19, in a match arranged between 2 families who liked each other's land, and somewhere in the quarter century since, against no one's expectations, and certainly not their own, the arrangement turned into an actual friendship. Roman marriage at this level was an institution of property and alliance, and the historians are right to tell you so. But the tombstones tell you something else too. They are covered with phrases like, "She never gave me a bitter hour," and "We lived together 30 years without a quarrel." Formulaic, yes. The way beloved wife is formulaic, and yet somebody chose to pay the stonecutter for those particular words. The meal itself would disappoint a Hollywood set decorator profoundly. There is no peacock. There is no dormouse rolled in honey and poppy seed. No flamingo tongue. None of the fever dream banquet menu that one Roman satirist invented to mock his own era's worst hosts, in which we have been treating as a documentary ever since. There is bread. There is soft cheese and hard cheese, olives, eggs, dried figs, a little cold sliced pork left from midday, and honey for the bread's end. The famous Roman orgy of eating was real, but rare a special occasion performance, like a wedding banquet, and physicians of the era spent a great deal of ink telling everyone that a heavy supper was the enemy of sleep. The everyday Roman evening table was closer to what your grandmother would have called a light supper, and she would have approved of it without reservation. A word about flavor, because the modest spread hides a sophisticated palate. The amber thread running through Roman cooking was garum fish sauce, fermented in coastal factories and grated like wine. The best fetching prices that scandalized moralists and deterred nobody. A dash of it went into nearly everything, supplying exactly the savory depth that East Asian kitchens never stopped getting from the identical product. Around it ranged honey and vinegar in deliberate sweet-sour argument, herbs we still use coriander, lovage, mint and pepper, shipped from the Indian coast at staggering markup, locked up by sensible housekeepers like coin. The Roman tongue, in short, would find a modern Vietnamese table more familiar than a mid-century casserole. On a quiet night like this, the kitchen reaches for a little of it. Bread, cheese, and olives season themselves. But even the simple supper sits on that shelf's foundations, and when the figs are dipped in honey with one drop of vinegar, that is not rustic accident. That is a cuisine editing itself for evening. The wine arrives already civilized, which is to say, watered. Chloe mixes it at the table. 1 part wine to 2 parts water tonight. The evening ratio, gentler than what a dinner party would pour. Drinking wine neat was, to the Roman mind, the habit of barbarians and the fast road to ruin. The whole point of the grape was conversation, and conversation drowns at full strength. The wine itself is from the family's own small estate north of the city, and it is, Lucius will cheerfully admit, mediocre. He owns better. He serves the better to guests. This is the private vintage of a man with nothing left to prove on a Tuesday night, and there is a particular honesty in a mediocre wine you grew yourself that the great vintages never quite manage. What do they talk about, these two? Alone at the end of a Roman day, the evidence lets us guess with some confidence. Because Romans wrote letters about their evenings the way we take photographs of ours. They talk about the household, the steward's report from the farm, a sick kitchen boy, the price the fuller quoted for cleaning winter cloaks. They talk about family, their son, serving on a provincial governor's staff in Syria, whose last letter took 6 weeks to arrive. Their married daughter across the city, expecting a child in the autumn. They gossip carefully, even at home, because this is an empire where the wrong joke about the wrong man travels. And some nights, they simply eat figs and say very little, in the way of people who have already had most of their important conversations and are content to let the fountain do the talking. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the household's other supper is happening, the one the historians had to dig harder to see. Philon the doorkeeper, Thais the cook, Chloe, Felix, and the rest eat after the family is served. Bread of a coarser grind, a porridge of spelt and beans, the olives that didn't make the master's table, watered wine of a grade politely described as functional. It is plain food, but it is reliable food, and reliability was nothing to sneer at in a city where the free poor upstairs in the tenements often had no kitchen at all and bought their suppers hot from cookshops or went without. At this table, there are jokes we will never hear, alliances and irritations, and an entire society invisible to the dining room 40 feet away. Every great house held 2 households. Only one of them wrote things down. Now, in fairness to Hollywood, the other kind of Roman evening did exist, and Lucius hosts one perhaps once a month. The formal dinner party, the convivium, 9 guests on 3 couches. Never more than 9 at a table, the etiquette books insisted. No fewer than the graces. No more than the muses with the good silver out, the good wine flowing, garlands on every head, and a hired lyre player in the corner. Those evenings ran long and bright and cost a fortune in lamp oil. They had courses and a planned seating chart, and after-dinner drinking with its own elected master of ceremonies, who set the wine-to-water ratio for the table the way a bartender sets the pour. They could be magnificent. They could also be work. Pliny the Younger has a letter gently complaining about a host whose dinner sorted guests into tiers, fine wine for the front couch and plonk for the back. And the social anxiety in Roman dinner literature reads exactly like any era's. Who sat where? Who was not invited? who recited their own poetry at the table. And for how long? Heaven help the table, the satirists agreed when the host had written an epic. But notice which evening the Romans themselves wrote about with longing. The poet's fantasy meal, it is practically a genre, is not the banquet. It is precisely what is on this table tonight. Horace offered the splendors of town, daydreams in print about beans and greens at his own small farm table, with old friends and unhurried talk. Marshall writes out his ideal dinner menu for a friend, and it is eggs, fish, kid, olives, and the promise of no recitations. Afterward, he specifies that no recitations, the way you might promise no slide projector. The Roman establishment dined grandly because status demanded it, and dreamed all the while of the night off. Lucius, on his ordinary Tuesday, chewing his own mediocre wine and his wife's good company with equal contentment, is not the exception to Roman dining culture. He is its secret heart, the night every banquet guest privately wished he was having instead. The meal ends the way good small meals do not, with a decision but with a drift. A last fig, a last half cup, and then the two of them are walking the colonnade together while the table is cleared behind them, taking the gentle turn around the garden that Roman doctors actually prescribed. A short stroll after eating, they advised, settles the stomach and prepares the body for rest. Some of you may have had a grandfather who took the same walk down a porch and back every evening of his life on no doctor's advice whatsoever. Some knowledge just keeps getting rediscovered. If your family kept an evening ritual like this, the walk, the porch, the last quiet cup before bed, I would genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. Those rituals are this episode's whole subject, and yours are part of the same long story. At the fountain, Antonia stops and lets her husband walk on toward his study. Her evening is not finished, and this is the part of the Roman night that almost every documentary skips. While the master of the house begins his leisure, the mistress of the house is still on duty. The keys at her belt are not jewelry. In the next quiet hour, she will close out the entire operating day of a business with a staff of 20, a warehouse, a payroll of favors, and no electric light. We are going to follow her, because you cannot understand how this house sleeps so soundly until you have watched the woman who locks it up. Chapter 5. The Mistress of the House, a Roman woman's evening duties. Look closely at the keys. There are 5 of them on the iron ring, and each one is a sentence in the unwritten constitution of this house. The long one opens the strong room where the silver plate and the document chest live. The square-toothed one opens the wine store, the heavy one the grain store, the small one the chest of good linen, the last one the cash box from which the daily marketing is paid. When a Roman bride first entered her husband's house, the symbolic moment of her new authority was precisely this being handed the keys. And when Roman law described a divorce, one of its grimmest little phrases was the demand to hand them back. Antonia has carried these 5 keys for 26 years. They are not a metaphor. They are the difference between a house and a warehouse with beds in it. Her last round of the day is an inspection, made with the household steward, a Greek named Eutyches, who can calculate compound interest in his head and has opinions about everything. Together they walk the stores. How much oil came up from the cellar this week, whether the new amphora of fish sauce was short-measured, why the wool delivery is late. She checks the seals on the wine jars, not because she suspects anyone tonight, but because a house in which the seals are always checked is a house in which they never need to be. Her mother taught her that, in the same voice she now uses to teach her own daughter. If you ever watched a shopkeeper's wife count the till at closing, or a farm wife walk the barn before bed with a lantern, you have seen this exact walk, separated from this one by nothing but 19 centuries. Then she sits down with the tablets and does the books. Let us be precise about what this means, because the costume dramas rarely are. A Roman matron of this rank was, functionally, the chief operating officer of a small business. The house she runs consumes flour, oil, wine, wool, firewood, lamp oil, and money every day in quantities that must be ordered, received, verified, stored, and accounted for. Antonia reads, writes, and reckons, as did most women of her class. We have their letters, their poetry, even their birthday party invitations, including one written from one officer's wife to another on the cold northern frontier of Britain, in her own hand, warm as anything you ever received in the mail. The stereotype of the secluded, idle Roman lady dissolves the moment you look at the arithmetic. Nobody idle ran a household of 20 in a city with no refrigeration. In the corner of her sitting room stands a loom, warped with undyed wool, and on it hangs a half-finished length of cloth that nobody in this wealthy household strictly needs. Antonia could buy better cloth than she weaves. She knows it. The weaver she buys from knows it. The loom stands there anyway, and some evenings she works it, because for a Roman matron, woolwork was what the flag was. To your mother's generation, a duty become a symbol become a comfort. The most honored epitaph a traditional Roman woman could receive was a phrase of 2 words. She made wool. Even the first emperor, owner of the known world, made a point of wearing homespun, woven by his wife and daughters, a piece of political theater. Certainly, but theater works only when the audience knows the script. The script said, "The house that spins together holds together." Before she retires, one duty remains that no steward can perform for her. She walks back to the atrium, draws her mantle up over her hair, and stands before the little shrine of the household gods with a dish of grain and wine. There is no congregation, no priest, no scripture. Roman household religion was a private contract, renewed nightly. The family keeps the gods fed. The gods keep the family. The word they used was pax, peace, the same word they use for the end of wars. Whether Antonia believes the bronze figures are listening, whether she is praying for her son in Syria, or simply standing 1 minute in the oldest quiet she knows, the sources cannot tell us, and we will not pretend. What the sources do tell us is that when Romans dreamed of home from a distant posting, this flame is what they wrote that they missed, 1 door more before her own, and it is the stop that tells you most about how a Roman house actually worked. The kitchen boy with the fever, mentioned over supper, gets the mistress's visit on her way to bed. Antonia tests his forehead with the back of her hand. The instrument every mother has calibrated since the Bronze Age adjusts the blanket and leaves instructions and an herb infusion with Thais, who will sit up with him in shifts she has already arranged without being asked. The household's medicine chest is the mistress's department. Honey for coughs and wounds, the herb garden's standing pharmacy, and the family's own recipe book of remedies handed down like silverware. Great houses retained physicians, and Lucius will send for one in the morning if the fever holds. But the first line of Roman healthcare, for everyone under this roof, bond or free, was the matron with the lamp. Hospitals, as your generation knew them, wards, rounds, night nurses appear first in this world as a military invention in the legionary fortresses. The civilian version, for most of a millennium and a half, was her. Upstairs in her dressing room, the day is finally allowed to come apart. Her maid unpins the structured hair that respectability required and brushes it out with an ivory comb, 100 slow strokes by lamplight, the bone hairpins clicking one by one into a little dish. Then the face. Roman women cleansed off the day's cosmetics with oil and applied a night cream whose recipes survive. There are surviving Roman recipes involving bean meal and barley for the complexion, and a famous poet even wrote a how-to guide on skincare, perfectly seriously. A sealed pot of actual Roman face cream was dug up in London not long ago. Finger marks of its last user still grooved in the surface. The chemists who analyzed it found refined animal fat, starch, and tin oxide, and noted the formula was rather sophisticated. Vanity is not modern. Neither is the wish, at the end of a long day, to put your face back on the shelf. And here's a domestic detail that surprises almost everyone. Antonia's bedroom is her own. Roman aristocratic couples of this period very often kept separate sleeping chambers, his and hers, sometimes adjoining, sometimes across the house, and the arrangement carried no scandal and no particular chill. The shared marital bed existed as a symbol. It even had a ceremonial name and a place of honor. But actual nightly sleep was treated as a private bodily function, like bathing, and a Roman of rank saw no more reason to share a sleeping cell than to share a bathtub. Married couples of your grandparents' generation, with their twin beds on two sides of a nightstand, were closer to Roman practice than they ever suspected. The Romans would have found our insistence on the shared queen mattress rather touching and slightly impractical. At her door she pauses, lamp in hand, and looks down the corridor to where a line of light still shows under the study door her husband settling in with his scrolls, exactly where she knew he would be. She will be asleep before he is. She has risen earlier than him for 26 years and will do it again tomorrow. The Roman day was built on her shoulders as much as his, and the Roman night too. And history needs another generation of scholars yet to finish saying so properly. Later tonight, when the whole house lies dark, we will see that her day is still not quite as finished as it looks. There is a strange, lovely thing Romans did in the middle of the night that almost nobody remembers anymore. And she is part of it. But that comes later. First, her husband has an appointment with a bottle of cedar oil, a bronze scraper, and the most civilized half hour in the ancient world. Chapter 6, Cedar Oil and the Strigil, the Roman bath before bed. The first thing that reaches you is the air, thick, warm, faintly mineral, with steam drifting so slowly it seems painted in place. Then the sound, or rather the absence of it, water. This still makes a silence of its own, deeper than a dry room's. This is the balneum, the private bath suite. 3 small rooms tucked against the kitchen wall so the two could share a furnace, and it is one of the most extravagant things Lucius owns. Most Romans, including most rich Romans, did their serious bathing at the public baths in the afternoon in a roaring, sociable, gloriously undignified crowd. Lucius was there today too, as it happens, sweating alongside half the Senate. What happens at home tonight is something different. Not washing, exactly. Unwinding, performed as a liturgy. To feel how private this little suite is, you have to remember where Lucius spent his afternoon, because the public baths he visited at the 8th hour are everything this room is not. The baths of Trajan, crowning the hill across the valley, opened their doors when our senator was a grown man, and they are one of the wonders of the world that nobody bothered to list. A leisure complex the size of a small town, pools like harbors, vaulted halls you could fly a kite in, libraries, gardens, exercise yards, admission to quadrants, the smallest coin in the currency, cheap enough that a dock worker and a consul genuinely did sweat in the same steam. The din was legendary. We have heard Seneca's catalog of it. But the din was the point. The baths were the Roman afternoon's great social engine. The barber shop, the gymnasium, the club, the gossip exchange, and the swimming hole, all at once for everyone. A Roman who skipped the baths was either ill, in mourning, or up to something. And it was at the baths, this very afternoon, that half of tonight's tranquility was actually transacted. Because the baths were where a senator did his unofficial business, the conversations too delicate for the Senate floor and too important for letters. A word with an old colleague in the warm room about next month's vote. A nod exchanged in the cold plunge that settles a lawsuit before it files. An introduction performed with towels and perfect informality that will shape some young man's career for 40 years. Your generation closed its deals on the golf course and in the steam room of the Y, and you will recognize the institution exactly. Lucius comes home from the baths each evening, already unburdened, exercised, scraped, socially squared away. The evening ritual we are watching now is the second bath, the one that washes off the first. Not the city's water, but the city itself. The warmth in that pool does not come from nowhere, and Felix could tell you exactly where it comes from, because hauling the wood is his least favorite duty of the week. Beneath the bath floor runs a crawl space of stacked tile pillars. A furnace at one end breathes hot air through it, under the floor and up through hollow tiles in the walls, so that the whole room becomes, in effect, the inside of a radiator. The system is called a hypocaust, and it is one of the genuine engineering glories of the ancient world central heating, in the literal sense, 18 centuries before the cast iron boiler. The floor above the flues gets hot enough that bathers wore wooden sandals to cross it. Every calorie of that luxury is firewood, split and carried on someone's shoulders. And a private bath was the kind of expense that made even rich men bathe at home only some nights. The way a thrifty man of your father's generation kept a thermostat at 62 and called it bracing. Now, the oil. There is no soap in this world, or rather, soap exists, but Romans of this era regarded it as a pomade that northern tribes wore in their hair, which tells you everything about how fashion travels. The Roman cleansing agent is olive oil, and tonight it has been dressed for the evening, steeped with cedar and a breath of cypress, the resinous, pencil-shaving, hope chest scent that Romans associated with permanence and preservation. They were not wrong too. Cedar oil was what librarians brushed onto papyrus scrolls to keep the worms out, which means a Roman gentleman's evening cologne and his favorite book smelled like close cousins. There are worse fates than going to bed smelling like a well-kept library. Most of us should be so lucky. The oil goes on warm, worked into the shoulders and back, and then comes the tool that baffles every museum visitor who meets one, the Strigil. It is a blade of bronze, curved like a quarter moon, blunt as a butter knife, with a shallow channel down its length. Felix draws it along the skin in long, light strokes, and it gathers everything as it goes: the oil, the sweat, the day's dust, the dead skin rolling a thin gray line ahead of the blade, like a squeegee clearing a steamed window. The sensation, by every account that survives, sat somewhere between a back scratch and a barber's straight razor. thing done to you, requiring trust, ending in an almost audible cleanliness. Athletes scrape down after training. Their used oil and sweat scrapings were, and you may want to set down your drink, bottled and sold as a medicinal ointment. Celebrity merchandise is not a modern invention either. Nothing is. After the scraping comes the kneading, and on this subject, the Roman medical establishment spoke with one voice. The great physicians of the era prescribed massage and rubbing with oil as seriously as they prescribed anything for the digestion, for the humors, for old injuries, and explicitly, in several surviving texts, for sleep. A gentle rubbing down before bed, one medical writer advises, for those whose nights are restless. Lucius's right shoulder carries an old soldier's complaint from his years a junior officer on the Danube 3 decades ago, the kind of ache that veterans of any century could map for him precisely, and under Felix's thumbs it loosens by degrees you could almost hear. The Romans did not know what cortisol was. They knew exactly what it felt like, and they had built a whole apparatus of warmth, oil, and pressure for wringing it out of a man before bed. Then the water. Not the bracing cold plunge of the morning athlete at this hour, the warm pool only, blood warm and shoulder deep, where a man can float his arms and let the hypocost's patient heat finish the argument the massage started. The physicians approved of this too, with their usual caveat that the bath should be moderate and the hour not too late. Lucius lies back until only his face is above the surface, and the world reduces itself to one lamp flame doubled on the water. Somewhere beyond the wall, the furnace ticks as it cools. Those of you who ever came in from a January barn to a hot bath in a clawfoot tub in the years when the bathroom was the warmest room in the house know that this is not hygiene. This is absolution. He emerges pink, loose-jointed, and smelling of cedar, and is folded into a soft, loose evening robe, the kind of garment Romans wore to dinner parties, precisely because it was everything the toga was not. Light, comfortable, and possible to put on without assistance or a diagram. His hair is combed back. His feet go into soft sandals. By the standards of any century, the man is now in his pajamas, and like every man in pajamas since the invention of the concept, he has entered the hour in which he can no longer be reasonably asked to do anything. There remains one pleasure on tonight's schedule, the one he has been saving the way you saved the last of the coffee. It is waiting on his desk, rolled tight around an ivory rod, written in a dead friend's favorite philosopher's voice. The Romans had no word for the nightstand reading. They simply did it, nightly, by one lamp's light. And what Lucius reads tonight, and why a man who owns the world reads Stoics before bed, is our next stop on the way to that small, dark room. Chapter 7. A Roman garden at night. Fountains, ancestors, and moonlight. At the corner of the colonnade stands a marble head, and the moonlight does something to it that daylight never quite manages. By day, it is a portrait of Lucius's great-grandfather, every crease and jowl and disapproving line of him, because Roman portraiture of the old school flattered nobody and considered wrinkles a form of resume. By night, with the moon raking across it at this hour, the old man seems very slightly present, in a way that Lucius would never admit to noticing, and has never once failed to notice. He passes this face every evening on his way through the garden. It is, give or take, the same routine the old man himself kept in this same garden 90 years ago. Romans did not need photographs on the mantle. They had the actual faces, in stone and wax, watching the household go about its evening. The stone faces in the garden are only the public delegation. Inside, in a cupboard in the atrium, live the others. The imagines. Portrait masks of the family's ancestors worked in wax, kept like relics and brought out for funerals, when actors wore them in procession, so that the dead of the family could walk behind the newly dead, all the way to the forum. It is one of the most extraordinary customs of the ancient world, and one of the most quietly explanatory. A Roman aristocrat was never alone in his house, and never unobserved. He lived his whole life performing for an audience of wax. When the philosophers of his class wrote about acting rightly, even when no one is watching, they wrote as men raised in houses where, in a certain sense, someone always was. We will hear one of those philosophers speaking to Lucius directly in a little while, from the scroll waiting on his desk. Listen to the fountain for a moment, because the fountain is showing off, even if it pretends otherwise. Running water in a private home, on a hill, at night, is one of the supreme status symbols of this civilization. The water arrives by aqueduct from springs many miles outside the city, brought in along stone channels graded so finely that the water falls only a few feet per mile, then distributed through lead pipes under the streets. A private connection like this one required an imperial grant. The pipe itself was stamped with the owner's name, and archaeologists read those stamped pipes today, like a city directory of people who mattered. The fountain never stops. There is no tap. All night, every night, while the whole household sleeps, the mountain spring keeps arriving in the garden, patient as the moon. The sound Lucius falls asleep to is quite literally infrastructure. The planting, too, was chosen with night in mind, though it takes a gardener to notice. Roses, because Romans were unapologetically mad for roses, they grew them commercially, forced them out of season under heated frames, and imported shiploads of petals for festivals. Violets along the path edges, myrtle and bay for the dark glossy structure of the beds, box for the clipped borders, and over it all the damp green breath that a watered garden exhales after a warm day, mixed with wood smoke from the cooling bath furnace. A Roman writer on farming once listed the sense of a well-kept garden as a form of household wealth, and on a night like this, you can audit the claim yourself. We cannot reconstruct this garden's exact planting plan. No seed receipts survive, but gardens just like it were buried whole at Pompeii, and the archaeologists who excavated them found the root cavities of roses and the carbonized stems of violets, right where the painted garden frescoes said they would be. In the garden's corner stands a small monument to the limits of Roman engineering, the sundial, pedestal, and all, conscientiously telling the wrong time by moonlight. Romans had a complicated relationship with this instrument. When the first one arrived in the city centuries earlier, war booty from Sicily, it sat in the forum telling subtly incorrect time for 99 years, having been calibrated for a different latitude, and apparently nobody minded enough to fix it. A comic playwright of that era has a hungry character curse the man who invented hours and set up sundials to chop his day into pieces. The gods confound him. The belly was the only true clock. Every wristwatch-hating soul who ever retired and threw away the alarm clock has a friend across the centuries in that speech. At night, at least, the dial stands honest in its uselessness, and the garden runs on the older instruments, the moon, the dew, and the body's own clock, which the Romans trusted above all the bronze ones. The statues are the garden's other population, and at night they come into their inheritance. A marble herm of the bearded god of boundaries, a small bronze faun dancing forever beside the rosemary, a chipped Venus by the fountain that Lucius's father bought as Greek and original, and which is, the dealer's descendants may now be told, neither. Romans filled their gardens with sculpture, not as decor, but as company. The garden was understood as a little sacred landscape, a pocket of the countryside's old divinity folded inside the city walls, and the figures standing in the dark shrubs were its citizens. By moonlight, frankly, they earned their keep. There's an hour of the night when every gardener since Rome has glanced at a pale shape among the leaves and felt the back of the neck report something the front of the brain then has to talk down. The Romans, sensibly, decided the shapes were friendly, left them violets, and went to bed. And above the garden, the one luxury no emperor could tax, the sky. There's no city glow worth the name. Remember 1 million people below, and from this courtyard, the Milky Way is plainly visible, a sight that most people now living have never seen from inside any city on Earth. Lucius knows these stars the way men of your generation knew road maps, as practical equipment that happened to be beautiful. The farmers on his estate plant and harvest by their risings. Sailors he has dined with steer by them. The night sky was the working calendar, clock, and compass of the ancient world, and educated Romans could read it fluently, while also, it must be said, arguing bitterly about astrology, which the skeptics among them regarded roughly the way your father regarded the racing form. Some debates are also eternal. He sits on the bench a while longer with the lamp burning beside him, doing the thing the garden was built for, which is nothing in particular in pleasant surroundings. A Roman of his class would have called this odium leisure, but leisure with its dignity intact, the recharging of a public man, and an entire philosophy of the good life was constructed around the difference between odium and mere idleness. We might just say he is letting the evening settle. The bath has done its work. The wine has done its gentler work. The garden is doing the last of it. Somewhere out beyond the walls, the other Rome, the loud one, the one with the carts and the taverns and the 7,000 watchmen, is just getting started. And before the night is over, we will go down into it. But first, the light under the study door. The old man has a book waiting, and the book has been waiting 1900 years for us to read it over his shoulder. Chapter 8. Reading by Lamplight, Scrolls, Stoics, and the Roman Mind at Night. Picture for a moment a different night, 56 years before this one. An old man named Lucius Annaeus Seneca, tutor to an emperor, richest private citizen of his age, insomniac, asthmatic, and quite possibly the most quotable man Rome ever produced, sits up by a single lamp in a plain room, writing letters to a younger friend about how to live. He wrote them knowing perfectly well that strangers would read them for centuries. He says so, with the serene immodesty of a man who turned out to be right. Tonight, in the study on the Aventine, it is one of those very letters that lies rolled on the desk of our Lucius, who was a boy when the old philosopher was forced to die, and who has been rereading him for 40 years, the way other men reread their father's letters. The book itself deserves a minute, because nothing about it is a book in our sense. It is a roll of papyrus paper made from a Nile riverside reed, cut in strips, pressed crosswise, and polished smooth, perhaps 30 feet long, if you unrolled the whole letter collection, wound around a rod with ivory finials. You read it with both hands, unrolling with one and re-rolling with the other, so that finishing a book physically rewinds it backward, and the next reader must roll the entire thing back to the start. There is scarcely a reader alive who needs the concept explained, who ever rewound a cassette tape with a pencil. The scroll smells faintly of cedar oil, brushed on against bookworms, the same scent now on its owner's skin, which we may as well admit was half the point of choosing tonight's bath oil. A man likes to match his library. Settle onto the couch with him and notice something at once. He is not reading silently. His lips move. A low murmur keeps pace with his eyes. Romans normally read aloud, or at least half aloud. Even alone written words were understood as a script for the voice, and the great libraries of antiquity must have hummed like beehives. Silent reading existed, but it was uncommon enough that one famous churchman, centuries later, recorded with genuine wonder watching a bishop read with his eyes alone while his voice rested. So the philosophy Lucius takes in tonight arrives the way it was built to arrive, as a voice in the room. A dead man's sentences, breathed back into the air by lamplight, in the cadence the author heard when he wrote them. There are worse definitions of literature than that. On nights when his eyes are tired and at 55 by one small flame after a Senate day, they are often tired. Lucius does what any Roman gentleman did. He is read to. A boy named Hermes, 16 years old, Greek, sharp as a tack, and educated at the household's expense precisely for duties like this one, takes the stool by the couch and reads aloud in a clear, steady voice. He is called a lector, and a good one was treasured. One Roman senator we know of, a gentle and bookish man, was so attached to a young reader of his that when the boy died of illness, he wrote a letter about his grief that can still put a lump in your throat 19 centuries on. The ancient sources are like that, page after page of empire and law, and then suddenly, without warning, a man crying about a boy who read to him in the evenings. A door off the study opens into the room Lucius would rescue first in a fire and admits it freely. The library. It is small, a closet by the standards of the great public collections the emperors had lately begun attaching to their bath complexes, so that a Roman could genuinely exercise, bathe, and read under one roof, civilization having briefly peaked. But it is his. A few hundred rolls in cedar honeycomb shelving, Greek on the left wall and Latin on the right in the approved fashion, a marble Greek philosopher presiding from his niche. Homer is here in his grandfather's copies, the historians, the farm manuals, annotated in 3 generations of hands. Cicero by the yard, because a senator quotes Cicero the way a preacher quotes Paul. And one shelf of unfashionable poetry that he bought when he was 25 and keeps where visitors will not embarrass him about it. A man's library, then as now, was his honest autobiography, the public shelves, and the shelf that tells the truth. Where does a Roman buy a book at all, in a world without printing? From a street, mostly the Argoletum, running between the Forum and the tenement districts, was the bookseller's row, its shop fronts hung with advertisements for new titles, and its back rooms full of the actual publishing industry. Rows of trained copyists, taking dictation in unison, or transcribing a master copy, producing books literally by hand, at a rate a good shop could push to surprising volume. Marshall, ever the self-promoter, tells readers exactly which shop sells his latest collection, and even quotes the price, and adds, in another poem, the eternal author's complaint that since second-hand copies circulated and friends borrowed without buying, the poet saw nothing from most of his readership anyway. Piracy, remainder bins, and the author's royalty statement. The whole comedy of publishing was performed complete in togas. The books themselves were priced from a laborer's daily wage for a plain copy to fortunes for fine editions, or the collector's grail, then as now a roll in the author's own hand. Lucius owns one of those, a letter of his grandfather's friend, the historian, he does not display it. Some things you keep the way you keep the night quiet for yourself. The Romans even had a word for this hour, lucubratio, work done by lamplight, the ancestor of every midnight oil ever burned. Some of them were maniacs about it. The elder Pliny, the encyclopedist, rose for his lamplit study in the middle of the night or earlier, napped in scraps, and had books read to him at dinner, in the bath, and in his carriage, on the principle that any hour not spent learning was an hour embezzled from posterity. His nephew records all this with the exhausted awe of a man who had clearly been told to sit up straight and take notes on vacation. Our Lucius is not in that league and has no wish to be. One letter of Seneca, perhaps two. They are short on purpose. The philosopher knew his audience, and then the scroll is rolled, tied, and set back in its case. Bedtime reading, the doctors of the day agreed, should calm the mind, not spur it. On this point, 19 centuries of tired readers have voted with them. And then, before the lamp goes out, the practice. Seneca describes it in a passage Lucius could recite from memory every night when the light is removed and the house has gone quiet. Examine your own day before a private court. What fault did I mend today? Where did I speak too sharply, judge too quickly, flatter too easily? The philosopher learned the habit from an older teacher who did it nightly, and he reports that he sleeps better for it asleep, he says, deep and free, once the soul has been either praised or warned. Call it the examined life. Call it a moral ledger to match Antonia's household ledger down the hall. Call it cognitive housekeeping 2 millennia before the term. The Stoics, whatever else one makes of them, understood something your grandmother also understood. You sleep better with your accounts settled, all of them, including the invisible kind. He pinches out the study lamp himself, a small nightly economy that drives Felix quietly mad, since the master's calloused thumb and finger method was old-fashioned even then, and the room goes from amber to silver in half a heartbeat, the moon taking over the window like a relief watchman. If you have ever read by flashlight under the covers, or finished a chapter by kerosene while the generator rested, or sat with a book through a power cut because the book was better than the dark, you have stood inside this exact moment, and I suspect a good many of you have. Tell me about it in the comments, honestly. The best lamplit reading memories I have ever heard came from this audience. Now, scroll away, lamp out, accounts settled. Surely it is bedtime. It is but between this door and his pillow lies the single loudest obstacle in the ancient world, and we cannot get him to sleep until we have dealt with it. Open the shutter a little wider. Listen. That low rumble out there is not thunder. It is traffic. Chapter 9, The City That Never Slept. Noise, carts, and Rome after dark. Here is a number to hold on to. 0. That is how many delivery carts were legally allowed on the streets of Rome during the daylight hours. A ban laid down by Julius Caesar himself, with narrow exceptions for builders of temples and a few other privileged loads. The law was meant to make the daytime streets survivable for 1 million pedestrians, and it worked, more or less. It also had a consequence that Caesar, who slept famously little, perhaps did not lose much sleep over. Every wagon, every ox cart, every iron-rimmed wheel hauling grain, wine, timber, marble, and roof tile into the largest city on earth had to do it at night. All of it. Every night. The sun goes down, and the entire freight economy of an empire starts moving under your bedroom window. We have an ear witness. The satirist Juvenal, writing within living memory of this night, claimed with a satirist's license but a tenant's authority that most sick men in Rome die of insomnia. The wagons and the narrow, winding streets, he says, and the curses of stalled drovers would snatch sleep from a sea calf, from the emperor himself. Rents in this city ran on a cruel acoustic gradient. The poor lived low, near the street and the noise, or high under the tiles where the stairs and the fire risk lived. Quiet cost money, and real quiet cost a fortune. Juvenal's bitter arithmetic was simple. In Rome, sleep is the one luxury sold strictly by income. Keep that sentence somewhere handy, because in a little while it is going to crack our opening mystery wide open. The philosopher Seneca, never one to suffer quietly when he could suffer in print, once lodged directly over a public bathhouse, and his catalogue of the sounds coming up through the floor is one of the funniest passages in Roman literature. The grunting weightlifter and the hiss of his exhaled breath, the slap of the masseur's hands, cupped or flat, each with its own note, the splash of the cannonballing swimmer, the leg hair plucker advertising in a shriek, silent only when he had a customer who then shrieked for him, the sausage seller, the pastry seller, the drink seller, each with his own distinctive cry. Seneca claimed magnificently that a true philosopher should be able to concentrate through all of it, the mind making its own quiet. He then moved house. Philosophy is one thing, the leg hair plucker is another, while Lucius's household winds down. Across the river in Trastevere, a man named Titus Verus is just hitting his stride. He is a baker, a freedman, born enslaved in a bakery, and now the owner of one, which happened often enough in this trade that bakers became the very emblem of the self-made Roman. His working day is the photographic negative of a senator's. The grain arrives by barge at dusk. The donkey mill grinds through the first watch. The dough is shaped through the second. The ovens roar through the third. And by dawn, the loaves are stacked for a city that wakes up hungry. One of his predecessors, a baker named Richest, made such a fortune at this that he built himself a tomb shaped like a giant bread oven, decorated with a frieze of his workers, doing exactly what Verus's crew is doing right now. And it still stands in Rome today, the proudest monument to the night shift ever raised. Those of you who worked nights in a bakery, a mill, a press room, a hospital, this chapter is yours, and the Romans would have understood your hours completely. And then there are the taverns, the popine, the wine counters, the all-hours dice dens which respectable opinion held in roughly the regard your minister held the roadhouse out on the county line. The graffiti of Pompeii preserves their nightlife verbatim, boasts, scores, complaints about watered wine, a painted sign promising cool drinks, and on one famous wall, a fresco of dice players arguing, with their actual words painted coming out of their mouths like a comic strip. Emperors periodically issued regulations to limit what taverns could serve and when, with approximately the success such regulations always enjoy. The Roman night economy was loud, lubricated, and ineradicable, and every so often to the scandalized delight of historians, ever since a young emperor would disguise himself in a hooded cloak and go down into it, brawling through the taverns incognito, because apparently even owning the world gets dull by the second watch. Through this gauntlet, every night moved one of the Roman evening's stranger sights, the rich going home from dinner. A proper dinner party ended in full darkness, and the guest of rank traveled back through the black streets as a self-contained convoy, litter, bearers, and his own slaves walking ahead with torches, a moving bubble of bought light in a city that provided none. Street lighting as a public service barely existed. Your safe passage was, like your sleep, a private purchase. The satirist had bitter fun with the arithmetic. The poor man walks home by moonlight, praying, says Juvenal, while the rich man's path blazes with flambeaux, and his bodyguard clears the way. And drowsing inside the litter, garlands slipping over one ear, borne home asleep through dangers his torchlight kept at exactly arm's length. The senator after a good dinner was the Roman knight in one image, untroubled, expensive, and carried by other men. And the night streets carried one procession more, the quietest of all, and history requires us to walk a respectful moment beside it. The poor of Rome buried their dead at night, partly by ancient custom, for night was the old original time of all Roman funerals, and the torch carried before the bier was the ritual's heart. Partly by economics, for a night funeral was a plain funeral, hired cheap from the undertakers by the Esquiline Gate, without the daytime processions paid mourners and trumpeters that only money could field. So while the carts rumbled and the taverns sang, a family that had sat up with its grief would follow a single torch through the dark to the burial grounds beyond the walls, and the city made way, because even Rome's roughest night traffic made way for that. We mention it not to sadden the hour, but to keep faith with it. A real city's night holds everything, and any history of sleep that leaves out the people past waking is only half kept. The torch, Romans said, lighted you into the world at your wedding, and out of it at your funeral. The same torch. They thought about the night more deeply than almost anyone since. Beneath the cart rumble, the Roman night kept a second orchestra that the sources complain about almost as much: the dogs. Every courtyard had its chained watchdog. Every dog answered every other, and the relay of barking that began at one disturbance could roll across 3 districts and die out somewhere by the river. Having woken, Marshall would assure us, only the innocent. Add the rest of the section: cats disputing rooftops, mules complaining in their stables, the upstairs neighbor whose profession, to judge by the hammering, was either coppersmith or poltergeist, drunks performing the entire second act of a tragedy from memory, badly, and somewhere, always, a baby. The one instrument every century's night orchestra has in common. City people learned then what city people know now. You do not sleep because the night is silent. You sleep because the noise is familiar. It was the strange sound, the pause in the pattern. The dog that stopped mid-bark, that snapped a Roman's eyes open in the dark. The vigils knew it too. They listened for the silences. Through all of this move, the vigils, the watchmen we met briefly at the lamp room, 7 cohorts, roughly 1,000 men each, founded by Augustus after one fire too many, recruited heavily from freed slaves, and equipped not with swords, but with buckets, axes, ropes, and pumps. They are firemen first, and policemen by extension, walking fixed beats through the 14 districts, empowered to enter buildings, confiscate carelessly kept fires, and administer what the sources delicately call corporal admonishment to negligent householders. Their nightly rounds even included carrying lights and patrolling for ordinary crime, because Rome by night, in the moonless hours, was genuinely dangerous. Juvenal's checklist for the pedestrian, after dark, includes falling roof tiles, emptied chamber pots from 5th floor windows, muggers, and drunks looking for someone safe to hit. The prudent Roman who had to go out at night went with friends, with torches, and with as little jewelry as possible. The truly prudent Roman, like the one we left on the Aventine, simply did not go out at all. Now climb back up the hill with me and listen from the garden wall. From here, all of it, the carts, the taverns, the bakery, the watchman's boots compresses into a single low murmur, like surf heard from behind a dune. This is what money bought in ancient Rome, and now you have heard both sides of the transaction. Down there, a man with no choices lies awake while the wagons shake his shutters. Up here, behind 30 yards of garden and a wall of sleeping rooms arranged like packing material, around the master's quiet, the same city is barely a rumor. Juvenal told you, sleep in this city is sold by income. Lucius is about to walk to the most expensive purchase in his entire house, a room that cost more silence than any room in Rome, and it is, you will remember, the size of a pantry. The answer to our opening riddle is standing right there in the dark, holding a curtain open. Let's finally go in. Chapter 10. The Mystery of the Roman Bedroom. Why so small, so dark, so plain? The curtain slides back on its bronze rings with a sound like a quiet cough, and here it is at last. The room we have been circling all night. Take a good look, because your eyes will need a moment to believe how little there is to see. The chamber is perhaps 8 feet by 10. The ceiling stoops. There's no window, or at most, high in one wall, a slot the size of a mail chute, shuttered. There is a bed, narrow as a ship's berth, a small chest, a stand for a lamp, a chamber pot of glazed clay in the corner, and nothing else whatsoever. The man who owns 3 reception rooms, sheathed in marble, a private bath, a fountain fed from mountains 40 miles away, this is where he actually lives 1/3 of his life. The Romans called the room a cubiculum. The word means, more or less, the lying down place. It does not mean showplace, and that, as we are about to see, is the entire point. Understand first what this room is not. It is not a poverty of imagination, and it is certainly not poverty. Look closer at the walls and you will find frescoes finer than anything in the dining room. Miniature architectural fantasies in oxblood and gold, painted for an audience of 1 at a range of 4 feet. Archaeology confirms the pattern all over the Roman world. Bedchambers, tiny and exquisite, lavished with the most intimate art in the house, while the public rooms got the square footage. A Roman looking at one of our master bedroom suites, the acreage of carpet, the picture windows, the bed sized like a raft for a family of 5 would not have been envious. He would have been confused. Why, he would ask, would you spend your largest room on the one activity you perform unconscious? Now for the evidence that unlocks everything, and it comes from the best possible witness. A Roman senator describing his own favorite bedroom, in his own words, in a letter that survives complete. Pliny the Younger, writing about his beloved villa on the coast at Laurentum, saves his greatest enthusiasm not for the dining room with its sea views, but for a suite he built at the end of a covered walkway, a sleeping chamber wrapped inside a buffer of corridor and double wall, with his words, an intervening passage that swallows every sound, so that during the December storms, with the sea hammering the shore 100 yards away, he lies in what he calls a silence and a darkness so deep that he hears nothing, sees nothing, and might be in another city than his own bustling household. He built, in the first decade of the 2nd century, a soundproof room, and he writes about it the way other men wrote about triumphs. Remember, at the beginning of tonight, we asked why the richest man on the hill chooses to sleep in a windowless cell the size of a pantry. Here is the answer, and it is sitting on the edge of that narrow bed right now, holding a clay cup of warmed honeyed wine that Chloe left on the chest, listening, Listen with him. The carts are gone. The taverns are gone. The fountain is a thread. The house is a held breath. And inside these four close walls, there is nothing. No draft, no flicker, no rumor of the million people down the hill. The answer was never modesty, and it was never asceticism. The small, dark room is the loudest possible boast, made in the only currency that mattered after sundown in ancient Rome. Juvenal told us, sleep is sold by income. Very well, this room is what the top of the market looked like. Marble was cheap by comparison. Any merchant could buy marble. What Lucius bought with the garden and the walls and the wrapping of corridors and the staff of 20 was 8 hours of silence in the noisiest city on the planet, and he spends them every night in the one room in Rome where absolutely nothing happens. Luxury. Thy name is nothing happening, and once you have the key, every odd feature of the room confesses its purpose. The walls are masonry 2 feet thick, silence and coolness in August, and warmth in January. Because a small room holds the body's own heat, the way a big one never will. The Romans heated bedrooms with braziers only reluctantly, knowing, correctly, that charcoal fumes in a closed room could kill, and preferring architecture to do the work. The missing window is not a missing window, it is the absence of the street. The darkness was prized, not endured. Roman medical writers ranked deep darkness among the conditions of wholesome sleep, and the high shuttered slot let a servant ventilate the room at dawn without ever giving the night a way in. Even the narrowness of the bed has a logic. This is a room for one sleeper and his thoughts, by a people who treated sleep as a private appointment, like prayer or the latrine, not a shared performance. Strange to us. Stranger still, try arguing with the results. How do we know any of this about the most private room of a private house? Because the bedrooms, almost alone among Roman rooms, were caught in the act. At Pompeii and Herculaneum, the cubicula survive complete. Wall niches shaped to vanished headboards, mosaic floors with a planar panel marking exactly where the bed stood, fitted carpet fashion, and at Herculaneum, the actual beds, carbonized to charcoal in their places. The walls even talk. Bedroom graffiti survives, scratched lullaby close. Names, accounts, a line of poetry, the small marginalia of people thinking in the dark. Archaeologists map the niches and tell us the beds were short, narrow, and placed away from the door's draft. The historians read the graffiti and tell us the rest. Between them, the lying down places of the Roman world are documented to a level of certainty most of all ancient history would envy. We know how they slept better than we know how they voted. One more feature of the room remains, and it is lying down in the corridor outside. Felix sleeps there tonight, on a pallet across the master's threshold, part guard, part night bell, part human intercom, ready to relight a lamp, fetch water, or rouse the house at a word through the curtain. It was utterly standard practice. Aristocratic Romans were never farther than one call from another human being, all night, every night, and a man like Lucius would have found our sealed and solitary bedrooms not peaceful, but eerie. We should not prettify the arrangement. Felix has no chamber of his own at all, and the elderly doorkeeper, Philon, down at the entrance, sleeps in a cell barely wider than the door he guards. And in some houses, the law being what it was, doorkeepers slept chained. The silence of a Roman night, like everything else in a Roman house, was kept by people who were not asked. Honor the engineering. Remember the cost. History asks us, as always, to carry both. So the mystery is solved, And the solution turns out to be the most modern thing we have met all night. A rich man paying any price for darkness, quiet, and cool still are the same three commodities, you may notice, that every sleep scientist of our own century keeps writing books about. And that your own bedroom, with its blackout blinds and its white noise machine and its thermostat set low, is straining to reproduce. The Romans got there by masonry and moonlight 1900 years early. But do not let him blow out that lamp just yet, because the bed he is lying down on is a small engineering marvel of its own. And what is inside that mattress, and that pillow, and those blankets, is a story that runs from German goose farms to Egyptian linen fields. The lying down place deserves a chapter on the lying down furniture. Stay with me. Chapter 11. Inside the Roman bed, mattresses, pillows, and the craft of comfort. Most people, asked to picture an ancient bed, imagine something penitential, a stone shelf, perhaps, with a log for a pillow. They are picturing the wrong civilization. The bed Lucius is lying on is a piece of engineered furniture that a craftsman of your grandfather's generation would turn over, inspect, and pronounce properly made. The frame is seasoned maple, the legs turned on a lathe and sheathed in molded bronze. Across the frame runs a lattice of leather straps, tensioned like the strings of a tennis racket, which is to say, this bed has suspension. On top of that, the mattress, on top of the sleeper, layered wool, and the whole assembly rides high enough off the cold floor that it is mounted from a footstool like a carriage. Beds, substantially like at bronze fittings, webbing and all have been recovered from the buried towns near Vesuvius, and carbonized wooden ones from Herculaneum stand in museums today, still recognizably good furniture. The Romans took comfort seriously, and like everything they took seriously, they standardized it, priced it, and produced it at every grade from cot to four-poster. What is inside the mattress is a precise map of Roman society, layer by layer. At the bottom of the market, straw, rushes, or dried leaves, stuffed in coarse ticking the bedding of the soldier, the slave, and the tenement, rustling and flattening and needing to be restuffed, the original meaning of the phrase to hit the hay. The respectable middle slept on wool, washed and carded, resilient and warm. And at the top, the cloud stratum of the trade, feathers, and above feathers, down. The elder Pliny records that the down of German geese was the most prized of all, fetching spectacular prices by the pound, and adds in the tone of a man filing an audit, finding that commanders of auxiliary cohorts on the northern frontier had been known to detach entire units from sentry duty to go goose hunting, the bedding market being what it was. Soldiers of the 20th century who spent a week's pay on the good sleeping bag may consider themselves part of an ancient and honorable tradition. Lucius's pillow is German down in Egyptian linen. The empire, it turns out, is also a bedding catalog. Over the sleeper, the same logic and textiles. Sheets of linen, the finest of it, Egyptian. Woven so smooth, the Romans paid silly money for it. Prized in summer, for the same reason your mother prized it, linen sleeps cool. Above that, wool blankets, and the best of those came from Gaul. The Romans, with their genius for logistics, had turned the whole northwestern empire into a textile district, and a well-stocked bedding chest on the Aventine held the work of 3 continents, without anyone finding that remarkable. The blankets came in weights for the seasons. The linens were stored with lavender against moths, and the entire kit was aired, beaten, and rotated by the household staff on a schedule Antonia could recite asleep. No Roman housewife would be even slightly surprised by the linen closet of a well-run farmhouse in the 1940s. She would only ask, looking at the mothballs, what on earth happened to the lavender before the blanket, the small ablutions which deserve their footnote because the questions always come. Yes, the Romans cleaned their teeth with powders ground from pumice, bone ash, or burnt shells, rubbed on with a finger or a frayed twig. Recipes survive, some scented with myrrh, and the poet's mockery of bad breath and false teeth proves the standards were real and socially enforced. Yes, there were dentures. Etruscan goldsmiths were bridging teeth before Rome had paved streets. Face and hands are rinsed at the bronze basin. The full bath, as we have seen, belongs to afternoon and evening. As for the facility in the corner, the glazed chamber pot, since the house's single latrine sits off the kitchen, sensibly near the drain, and nobody is walking that corridor at midnight. It was emptied by the staff each morning, and in the tenements, notoriously, sometimes out the window, a practice the law fined precisely because the law kept failing to stop it. There. Now you know, the curiosity is discharged, and the Romans, who wrote frankly about all of it, would wonder why it took us so long to ask. And if sleep refused to come anyway? The Roman medicine chest stood ready, with remedies ranging from the charming to the genuinely effective to the genuinely alarming. At the charming end, lettuce, which ancient medicine firmly believed to be soporific. The elder Pliny recommends it. The Emperor Augustus's physicians prescribed it, and lettuce juice appears in sleep recipes for centuries. Your grandmother's warm milk occupied the same shelf of the same tradition. Warmed wine with honey, in moderation, was the standard nightcap moderation, the doctors insisted, because they knew perfectly well that too much wine bought shallow sleep at compound interest. At the effective and alarming end, poppy. The Romans knew opium, prescribed it knowledgeably, measured it carefully, and the better physicians wrote warnings about dependence and dosage that read with uncomfortable freshness. The medical writer Celsus, ever sensible, preferred engineering to pharmacy. For the sleepless, he suggests the sound of falling water near the bedchamber, rocking, and the avoidance of heavy suppers and heavy thoughts. The fountain in the peristyle, in other words, is not just decor. It may be the oldest white noise machine in the historical record. Tonight, none of it is needed. The bath did its work, the walk did its work, the philosopher did his, and the honeyed wine sits half-finished on the chest, a remedy outrun by its patient. Lucius lies on his side in the dark. Roman doctors had opinions about sleeping positions too, and recommended beginning the night on one side, though they argued about which in the immortal manner of experts, and his breathing has already found the long rhythm. He does not count sheep. The Romans never heard of the custom, which appears in the sources many centuries later. He has no need of it. The room is black and silent as the inside of a sealed amphora. The mattress carries him on its leather springs, and the last thing he hears, as the lamp drinks its final drop of oil and lets go, is the fountain faint, regular, arriving from 40 miles away. 8 feet by 10, the best room in Rome. And there we might end, except that we would be ending the Roman night in the middle, because here is the last great secret of this whole subject, the strange and lovely thing I promised you when Antonia paused at her door. Lucius will not sleep through until morning, and neither will she, and neither will almost anyone in this city or this world, and when they wake in the black middle of the night, none of them will be the least bit worried about it. What pre-industrial humanity did in the hours between its two sleeps, is one of the most quietly astonishing rediscoveries historians have made about everyday life. And it changes how you think about your own 3 a.m. ceiling, staring forever. That story is next. The house is dark now. Let it be dark a while. We will meet everyone again at midnight. Chapter 12. First Sleep and Second Sleep. The Forgotten Roman Midnight. What did you do? The last time you woke at 3 a.m, stared at the ceiling, and ran the arithmetic of how much sleep you had left, while the worry of being awake kept you awake? Then you have just experienced the single greatest difference between your night and a Roman's, and it has nothing to do with mattresses. Some hours after midnight, Lucius's eyes open in the dark, and nothing happens. No alarm, no frustration, not even surprise. He's woken like this nearly every night of his 55 years, as his father did, as the whole sleeping world around him does. He lies in the blackness, warm, unhurried, somewhere on the calm side of consciousness, and lets the night carry him. Because Romans, along with it appears, most of humanity before the electric light, did not expect to sleep the night in one piece. They slept in two. The Latin sources speak of it so casually that for centuries, scholars read right past it. Roman writers date events to primo somno, during first sleep, as naturally as we would say, around midnight. Livy uses the phrase for night attacks, Pliny for natural wonders observed in the dark hours. The very existence of the phrase gives the game away. If there is a first sleep, there is a second. In between lay a quiet, waking interval the sources treat as perfectly ordinary furniture of the night, an hour, sometimes more. In the night's black middle, when sleepers of every rank surfaced, did some gentle human thing, and slid back under until dawn. A historian who spent years gathering such references from across the pre-industrial world found them by the hundred in court records and diaries and medical books from Homer onward. First sleep and second sleep, dead sleep and morning sleep, as unremarkable to our ancestors as lunch. So what did they do in that strange soft hour? Everything quiet that humans do. They prayed later centuries would even write special offices for the night waking, and Roman households made small hours of darkness observances of their own. They talked, couples surfacing together in the dark, exchanging the unguarded sentences that only exist at that hour. The medical writers, with their usual lack of embarrassment, recommended the interval between sleeps as the best of all times, for married affection, relaxed, warm, and private. And you may file that under advice the species never needed written down. They reflected. One Roman moralist praised the night watches as the hours when the mind owns itself, before the day's claims resume. Antonia, tonight, simply rises, relights her lamp from the banked embers that Thais left her, listens to her house the way a captain listens to a ship at anchor, hears nothing wrong, and is content. Down the corridor, her husband is composing tomorrow's letter to their son in Syria, sentence by sentence in the dark, without a stylus, a habit he would tell you is practical, and which is, in fact, the closest thing the old Stoic does to prayer. It was the same below stairs, where the watch between sleeps had its own modest economy. Felix mends a sandal strap by one flame. Thais warms the last of the evening's posca and counts tomorrow's marketing in her head. In the tenements down the hill, 1,000 small lamps flicker on for an hour, as the city's poor patch tunics, nurse babies, settle arguments, and visit across the landings, before the second sleep draws everyone down again. The night was not a wall in this world, It was a courtyard with 2 rooms opening onto it. And we should be honest about the scholarship. In the channel's usual way, the richest evidence for segmented sleep comes from later centuries, English court depositions, French physicians, parish records, and historians still argue about how universal, how seasonal, how Roman the pattern was. The ancient testimony is suggestive rather than overwhelming. But when sleep researchers in our own era took volunteers and removed artificial light entirely, giving them long, natural nights, something remarkable happened within a few weeks. Their sleep split, all by itself, into 2 blocks with a calm waking hour between. The pattern was not invented, it was waiting under the wiring. You can hear how natural all this was to them in their own vocabulary, because Latin named the parts of the night the way we name the parts of the day. After dusk came vespera, the lamp lighting, then conticinium, the hushing, the hour the house falls silent, and what a word to have lost. Then concubia nox, the lying down time of first sleep, then intempesta nox, the timeless depth, the hour without business, where we have just been. Then Gallicinium, the rooster's hour, and on to first light. A language only coins words for things its speakers use daily. English, child of the electric age, makes do with one blunt word: night, and a number on a clock face. The Romans lived in their darkness the way they lived in their city, district by district, each with its own name, character, and proper activities. They were not enduring the night. They were fluent in it before his second sleep takes him. Lucius does the thing the title of tonight's episode has been waiting for. He swings his feet onto the cool mosaic, wraps a mantle over his shoulders, and pads barefoot out to the colonnade, where the moon golden now, and lo is laying its last full light across the Tiber Valley. The dew has come up. The stone is cold in a way his physician would deplore, and his soul plainly does not. He stands there for a while in the silence between sleeps, a tired man on a dark hill in the middle of history, watching moonlight move on a river that was old before Rome and will be there after, and thinking, we may guess, since he is human about nothing very orderly, his son's next letter, his shoulder, a line of Seneca, whether the roses need water. Then the cold finds his ankles, and he goes back in. So the next time you wake at 3 a.m, ceiling above you, mind ticking, consider that you may not be broken at all. You may simply be ancient. Stand at the window a minute, on the Roman plan, before you try again. The moon is still free, and it still works. Chapter 13. The Watches of the Night, How Romans Told Time in the Dark. In a brick guardroom at the foot of the hill, a tired man is watching waterfall. Drop by drop, it slips from one bronze vessel into another, where a float rises past scratched markings, and that thin silver dribble is at this hour the official heartbeat of Roman time. The sundial rules the day, but the night belongs to the clepsydra, the water thief, the same instrument that timed lawyers' speeches in court. Advocates were literally granted so many jars of water apiece, and a windbag was a man who drank the water clock. By its drip, the watch commander knows when to send the next patrol, and when the third watch becomes the fourth. The night itself was divided, not into hours for civilians, but into 4 military watches. Vigilia, a system so practical that every army from that night to this one has kept some version of it. When a Roman said, "It happened in the third watch," he was using the Navy's clock, and everyone understood. But here is the detail that separates the Roman night from ours absolutely. The length of an hour was not fixed. Romans divided the daylight into 12 hours and the darkness into 12 hours. Whatever the season, which means a summer night hour might run barely 40 of our minutes, while a midwinter night hour stretched past 75. Time itself breathed with the year, long and slow in winter darkness, quick and shallow in June. Nobody found this strange. It is, if you think about it, how a farm actually works. And your great-grandparents, rising with first light in June at 4:30 and in December at 7:30, kept seasonal hours in everything but name long after the clock on the mantle claimed otherwise. For the deep watches, when no lamp burned and no water clock dripped nearby, the sleepless Roman read the time the oldest ways, by the wheel of the stars past the roof tree, by the height of the moon, and toward the night's end, by the first cock crow an hour, so proverbial the Romans named it Galicinium, the rooster's hour, the dark's first crack. And down on the river itself, in the middle of the Tiber, the night is holy. On the boat-shaped island in the stream stands the temple of Aesculapius, god of healing, and under its porticos at this very hour lie rows of sleeping pilgrims, the sick and the worried, wrapped in cloaks, who have come to perform the ancient rite of incubation. Sleep deliberately sought in a sacred place, in the hope that the god will walk through their dreams and leave a prescription behind. Priests recorded the cures on tablets. The practice was already old when Rome was young, and the desperate came from across the empire to try it. A Roman, you see, took dreams seriously as a category, not all dreams, and not naively. Their own writers mocked the credulous and sorted true visions from the noise of a heavy supper with surprising rigor. An entire professional dream interpretation manual survives, 5 books of it, classifying thousands of dream images with the deadpan thoroughness of an insurance actuary. Dreaming for Rome was not static on the channel. It was, potentially, male. The great surviving dream manual, 5 books compiled by a professional named Artemidorus, who spent a lifetime collecting dreams the way a naturalist collects beetles, lets us eavesdrop on what Romans actually brought to the night's mailbox. His files are gloriously concrete. Dreams of losing teeth, of flying, of being chased, of appearing naked in the Forum, the entire standard catalog of the anxious human night, utterly unchanged in 2,000 years. Every one of them sorted by the dreamer's trade and circumstances, because Artemidorus insisted, quite sensibly, that the same dream means different things to a sailor and a senator. He interviewed athletes before games and merchants before voyages. He noted which dreams came true and which did not. He warned against interpreters who flattered for money. It is, in its way, the first sleep research database, compiled with a rigor that shames many a later century. The Romans could not record an 8-hour brainwave. They recorded the content instead, and their archive of the night mind is still the biggest one antiquity left us. Not every Roman met the dark with a philosopher's calm, and the youngest met it the way children always have. The Roman night had its population of nursery terrors, faithfully recorded by the adults who had once feared them, the Strix, the screech owl witch that came for babies, the Lamia, the child-stealing she-monster of 1,000 bedtime warnings, and the all-purpose bogeyman, whose name nurses invoked to get vegetables eaten and lamps left alone. Against them stood the nurse herself, that towering figure of ancient childhood, so beloved that grown senators kept their old nurses in comfort, for life, and mourned them like mothers armed with lamplight, lullabies, and the storyteller's older magic, The Latin phrase for a fairy tale was Aeneas fabula, an old woman's story told at night by the bed. The one great example that survives whole begins in the telling of a frightened girl's old nurse, with words every one of you heard in your own first bed. There was once a king and a queen. Some inventory, a small bed, a kind voice, a story against the dark. 19 centuries, and not one item on the list has changed. As for the grown Romans, their night fears were managed the way everything in the civilization was managed, by ritual, redundancy, and a division of labor that included the gods. The shrine flame burned all night in the atrium, the one flame never extinguished. The house's soul kept alight. May was the month of the Lemuria, when the father of the household rose at midnight, barefoot, and walked the rooms tossing black beans over his shoulder for the wandering dead, repeating a formula 9 times to send the ancestors back satisfied. The historian in me is obliged to report that Lucius performs this rite annually with complete seriousness, and the husband in him would add that Antonia checks afterward that he got the bean count right. Mock it gently if you like, and Romans themselves told ghost stories for fun, including a haunted house tale with a rattling chain that is beat for beat, the granddaddy of every one you heard at camp. But notice what the rituals actually accomplished. They gave the formless dark a shape, a schedule, and a procedure. Fear that has a procedure is half tamed already. Your generation, which checked the furnace, locked the doors in a fixed order, and kept a flashlight in the same drawer for 40 years, needs no footnote on this point. Chapter 14, The Empire Asleep. Night watches from Syria to the sea. 1,500 miles east of the Aventine, under the same moon, Lucius watched from his colonnade. A young man named Marcus Caecilius Rufus is standing the 3rd watch on a fortress wall in Syria, and he's thinking about a fountain. He is 26, a junior tribune on the governor's staff, the son whose letters take 6 weeks to reach the Aventine. And tonight the watchword has been passed, the rounds made, the water clock in the Principia dripping toward his relief. Army night discipline was the most serious timekeeping in the Roman world. The watchword written on a wooden tablet and carried man to man at dusk. Sentries checked by officers walking circuits. And the penalty for sleeping on watch, a thing we will not dwell on at this hour, except to say the legions did not regard the night casually. Veterans in this audience who stood watch in colder places, a DMZ winter, a flight line at 4 in the morning, a destroyer's bridge in the North Atlantic, know exactly what young Marcus knows. That the deep watches are where a soldier meets himself, and that no one who has stood them ever quite hears the phrase, the middle of the night, the same way again. If that was you, the comments are yours tonight. This channel does not forget who kept the watches, 30 miles north of the city, on the Sabine estate whose mediocre wine we drank at supper. The farm is sleeping the way farms have always slept, which is to say, lightly, with one ear open. The steward's lamp burns late over his accounts, because the master's ledger and the mistress's questions arrive with the next cart. The farm hands are long down in the loft above the warm stable, on straw, under shared blankets, in the oldest sleeping arrangement in agricultural history. The Roman farm manuals are unsentimental about night on the land. The agricultural writers instruct that the household rise before light, that the steward be first up and last down, that lamps be lit in winter darkness so the day's work can start before the day. Cato, the crustiest of them, allowed that on rainy nights there was indoor work to do by lamplight. The man could hear a sestertius being wasted from 3 fields away. But the same manuals order the animals bedded soft, The oxen rested in strict rotation, and the watchdog fed at nightfall. So he loves the house. Practical mercy, 18 centuries before anyone wrote the phrase animal welfare. A farm at night is a single sleeping body, human and animal together. And the Romans ran it exactly the way your grandfather did. By lantern, by rotation, and by getting up first. And out on the dark Mediterranean, the bread Rome will eat on next month is sailing through the night without stopping. The great grain freighters from Alexandria, wooden ships the size of small warehouses, the supertankers of antiquity ran on through the darkness when the weather served. Because a million people's breakfast does not heave to at sunset. The helmsman steers by the stars our senator was naming in his garden, the bear for the north, the risings and settings the pilot books listed harbor by harbor. The night sea was the same sky clock as the night city, red for keeps. It was dangerous. Of course, the sailing season itself was closed all winter, precisely because the stars disappear behind storm. St. Paul's shipwreck, a generation before our night, happened to a grain ship that pushed the season. But on a settled spring night like this one, with the wind steady on the quarter and the wake whispering, the helmsman's watch was perhaps the most beautiful workplace in the empire, and he would have traded it, he'd tell you flatly, for one night in his own bed in Ostia. The night shift's oldest paradox. The view is magnificent and wasted on the people who would rather be asleep. Stitching all these sleeping provinces together, the empire's nervous system ran on through the dark. The cursus publicus, the state post, whose riders did not stop for nightfall. A government dispatch moved by relay, fresh horses, waiting at stations a half-day's ride apart. Inns and changing posts strung along the great roads like beads, and an urgent message could cover 50 miles in a day. Far more in a crisis, the record runs passing into legend. The future emperor Tiberius, riding relay through day and night, covered some 200 miles in 24 hours to reach his dying brother. Ordinary travelers, too, pushed on after dark when the moon served and the road was the Appia, smooth, straight, and patrolled through the night inns of the empire, enjoyed roughly the reputation of any century's worst roadside motels. And the prudent slept in their own bedding, having counted their luggage twice. The roads we covered in another episode were built for the legions, but it was at night, carrying the mail, that they did their quietest empire keeping. A letter posted in Syria found a particular door on the Aventine. Marcus's last one took 6 weeks. It traveled every single night of them. At the river's mouth, where the Tiber meets the sea, the empire keeps its biggest lamp of all. The lighthouse of Portus, a stone tower built in tiers like a wedding cake, modeled on the legendary Pharos of Alexandria, burns its summit fire every night of the sailing season, fed by a duty crew hauling fuel up its stairs in an endless relay, so that the grain fleets feeling their way toward Rome in the dark have one fixed golden star that never wheels with the others. Every lamp we have met tonight scaled up to imperial size. The same olive oil and vigilance technology, the same logic of the kept flame, enlarged until ships could steer by it 20 miles out. The helmsman we left on the night sea is watching for it right now. Rome's nights, from the nursery niche to the harbor mouth, were a single nested system of tended fires, and not one of them, from smallest to greatest, kept itself. One light in the sleeping empire deserves its own paragraph, and it is burning right now on the Palatine, in the palace. The emperor is awake. Hadrian soldier, architect, poet, restless polymath was notorious for it. The sources show him dictating before dawn, designing buildings in the margins of the night, planning the immense journeys that would keep him moving across his empire for most of his reign. Rulers in sleep have always made poor roommates, and Rome's archive on the subject is rich and human. Augustus, master of the world, was a bad sleeper who hated waking in the dark and kept companions talking at his bedside until sleep took him. Caligula, in his madness, wandered the palace corridors by night, calling for the dawn. The Romans drew the obvious moral and wrote it down many times that the man who owns everything owns no more night than anyone else, and frequently rather less. That command is purchased in the coin of sleep. Our Lucius, second sleep, gathering him in under a wool blanket in a room the size of a pantry, is at this moment richer than the emperor. He would never say so out loud. He's asleep and does not need to. Chapter 15. Festival torches, the nights. Rome stayed awake on purpose. Flutes, first high and doubled and slightly out of breath, then clapping, then the wet pine smell of torches, and around the corner comes the one sight that could pull every sleeper on the street to their shutters smiling, a wedding coming home. Not tonight on our quiet hill, but Lucius and Antonia walked at the head of such a procession only last summer for their daughter, and the memory belongs in any honest account of the Roman night. Because night was not only the empire's quiet warehouse shift, it was also the container for its deepest joys. A Roman bride was escorted to her husband's house after dark by torchlight, always. The procession was the legal heart of the whole wedding, the public carrying of one hearth's fire toward another, with nuts thrown like confetti. Ribald songs the ancients politely called festive, and the bride lifted over the threshold at journey's end, a custom whose explanation the Romans themselves had already half forgotten, and which has outlived them by 2,000 years anyway, your own generation having carried it across 1,000,000 suburban doorsteps without once asking why. The torch that lit the way was, quite consciously, the night's blessing. Fire made friendly, darkness turned to setting rather than threat. And once a year, in the dead of December, the whole nocturnal rulebook was thrown on the fire. Saturnalia, several days of it at this period, turned the Roman night inside out. Shops shut, courts shut. The stern woolen toga banned in favor of dinner clothes, gambling legalized for the duration, and the social order ceremonially flipped, with masters waiting on their slaves at table, or at least dining with them, in memory of a golden age before anybody owned anybody. The streets filled after dark, with exactly the crowds that respectable opinion deplored the rest of the year. Everyone wore the felt cap of the freed slave. Everyone exchanged gifts, wax candles, little clay figures, the gag gifts and joke poems whose 2-line tags survive by the 100 from the pen of Marshall, the original gift card writer. It was loud, warm, sentimental, faintly anarchic, and held in the darkest week of the year on purpose. The poet called it the best of days, and the nighttime candle giving at the winter solstice should sound warmly familiar to anyone who ever strung lights along a porch rail in December. Humanity has always answered the longest nights the same way, with small flames given to each other, and one fire in the city never banks at all. Down in the dark forum, in the small round temple at Rome's absolute heart, the sacred hearth of Vesta burns through every night of every year, tended in rotation by the 6 Vestal priestesses, watched at this hour, perhaps, by the youngest, a girl keeping the 3rd watch of the most important fire on earth. The Romans were perfectly explicit about the symbolism. Vesta's flame was the hearth of the whole Roman people, the city's own banked ember, and if it ever went out, the omen was so dreadful that the priestess on duty answered for it. Everything we have watched tonight in one house, the covered coals, the fed lamp, the kept flame as the kept soul Rome performed for itself, collectively, in that little temple, forever. A civilization may fairly be judged by what it refuses to let go out. Rome chose a fire tended by women, burning at the center of everything, all night, for 1,000 years. As mission statements go, the night shift has never had a better one. The Roman calendar also held nights that belonged entirely to women, and one of them was among the most solemn dates of the year. The December rite of Bona Dea, the good goddess, was celebrated at night in the house of a chief magistrate, hosted by his wife, attended by the matrons of Rome and the Vestal Virgins, with music, wine, and ceremonies about which we know almost nothing, because every male in the household, the master included, was turned out of his own front door until morning, and what the women did was protected by a religious secrecy the sources genuinely respected. We know how seriously Rome took it from the one night it went wrong. When a young aristocrat named Clodius smuggled himself in dressed as a flute girl, the scandal convulsed Roman politics for years and gave Cicero a courtroom feud for the ages. One night a year, the busiest men in the world stood in the street while their wives ran the most important house in Rome. The night, as we keep finding, held arrangements the day would never dream of. It is worth pausing on what the seasons did to everything we have watched tonight, because our gentle spring evening is the Roman night on its best behavior. In December, darkness owned 15 of every 24 hours on this latitude, and the elastic Roman clock stretched each night hour to match. The same routine we followed: lamps, supper, reading. Bed compressed itself toward the afternoon, and the long black surplus belonged to sleep, to lamp-lit work, and to the brazier, that handsome bronze danger which warmed the wealthy bedroom and, in badly ventilated rooms, sometimes quietly killed its owners. The sources record such deaths matter-of-factly, including an emperor's heir lost to fumes, and the prudent kept the curtain cracked. Summer flipped the ledger. Nights barely 6 hours deep, bedrooms gone stuffy, and Romans did exactly what your parents did before air conditioning they moved. Cots came out to the colonnade, the poor took to their roofs and balconies, the rich decamped entirely to the hills or the shore, abandoning August in Rome to the bakers, the watchmen, and the truly unlucky, anyone who ever slept on a screened porch through a Midwest July, listening to the night insects, has lived the Roman summer solution precisely. The architecture changes. The instinct never does. Chapter 16, The Fourth Watch. Rome wakes before the sun. It begins with a rooster, because it always began with a rooster. Somewhere down the hill, in a courtyard behind a cookshop, the first one fires that ragged, self-important bugle the Romans knew so well they named an hour of the night after it, and is answered across the dark city by a second, a third, a relay of them passing the news from the Aventine to the Esquiline, the Gallicinium, the rooster's watch, the hinge of night. The sky has not changed yet, or barely. Only a watery paleness, low in the east, that you would miss unless your trade required you to look for it. The bakers look for it, the watchmen look for it, and in the dark houses, the second sleep begins to thin all across the city, the way ice thins from the edges in. Thais is up first, as the cook always is, and the day's first act in this house is the same act it has been for 500 years. She lifts the cover from the banked hearth and finds the embers alive, orange-hearted, under their gray quilt of ash, exactly as she left them. The night's whole gamble paid off. Kindling, breath, patience. The fire stands up again. From this one rekindled point, the entire house will be relit, lamp by lamp, the morning running Felix's evening circuit in reverse. Antonia is awake minutes later. She's beaten the sun out of bed for 26 years and is not about to be embarrassed by it. Now keys at her waist, hair pinned for work, standing in the kitchen doorway with her first question of the day already asked. The house, like the Empire, is a relay of watches. The night watch is ending. Hers is taking over. The city's morning soundscape now assembles itself, and we have a Roman noise complaint to prove the schedule. Marshal Who Else addresses a furious epigram to a schoolmaster whose dawn classes met in the open street below the poet's window before the roosters have finished. The man's voice and his switch are thundering through the neighborhood. Blacksmiths are gentler, the poet swears, and he begs the man to accept a fee to keep quiet equal to what he earns for shouting. Roman primary school began at first light, in porticos and rented corners, children stumbling through the gray streets with lamps in winter. The schoolmaster's dawn racket was as standard a morning sound as the water cellars and the first hammering from the coppersmith's quarter. The city that denied everyone a full night's sleep at midnight now denied them the morning lie-in as well. Rome, in this respect at least, has been every city ever since. And outside the great oak doors, in the blue half-light, the morning's first clients are already assembling, the same patient parade we heard about at dusk, reforming like a tide coming back in. They have walked from the valley in the dark, togas over their arms to keep them clean, to be at the door when it opens. Dawn attendance was the whole point, and a client who arrived after sunrise might as well not have come. Philon, who heard their feet on the paving from his cell, he has heard everything from the cell for 30 years, is already drawing the bolts. The Roman social day is reattaching itself, obligation by obligation, exactly where it let go 14 hours ago. Down in Trastevere, Varus's night is ending in ranked hundreds of warm loaves, in the first cart legal, again at sunrise, or near enough rolling them toward the bread dole and the markets. In Syria, the fourth watch has handed Marcus his relief, and a tired young tribune is writing the word "Father" at the top of a wax tablet by the light of a setting moon. Felix opens the high shutter from the corridor that is what the slot was always for, and a single bar of new light drops across the blanket. And Lucius Cecilius Rufus wakes the way the whole ancient world preferred to wake. Gradually, with the sun, without an alarm, because the only alarm clock this civilization possessed was the household itself. Moving. He lies still a moment, taking inventory in the morning manner of every man, his age in every era, the shoulder, the back, the state of the world, and finds all three no worse than yesterday. 8 hours, in 2 installments, in the dark, in the quiet. The physicians would be satisfied, the philosopher would be satisfied, and most importantly, Antonia, who can read his sleep in his face at 40 paces, will be satisfied, which makes for a far better morning than the other kind. The little room has done its work again. Tonight it will do it again, and some 400 more times before this particular Roman runs out of nights. A thought he does not think this morning, in which the Stoic on his shelf would tell him to think calmly, in which we will leave with the cold lamp and the folded blanket behind us in the lying down place as we tiptoe out. The morning now runs the whole evening backward, like a tide reversing. The basin and the comb, a barber for the chin every other day, and a small ordeal even so. Roman razors being what they were then, breakfast, which barely merits the name. Bread dipped in wine or honey, a few olives, taken standing, dientaculum, fuel, rather than occasion. And then the toga goes back on, turn by turn, the two attendants orbiting him like moons, while he stands with his arms out, becoming, fold by fold, the public man again. Watch his face while they work. The ease of the night drains out of it by degrees, and the day's first arguments move in. You can see the Senate speech assembling itself behind his eyes. The client's petition, the letter to Syria. The toga, Romans said, was the garment of peace, but no one ever called it the garment of rest. Rest was the tunic, the bare feet, the small dark room. Rest was the other man, the one we spent the night with, who is being wound away now into 18 feet of wool until sunset lets him out again. Chapter 17. What the Roman night still teaches, a closing reflection. So ends one night in one house on one hill, 1900 years ago, and step back with me now, the way we stepped back at the beginning, to see the whole city in its new gold light. Everything we watch tonight has already dissolved into the morning. The lamps are cold, the moon is down, the second sleep is over, and a million people are resuming the day shift of history, which is the only shift the history books usually bother to record. That has always been the injustice of it. The Rome of noon, the legions, the speeches, the marble wrote itself down relentlessly. The Rome of midnight survives in fragments and lampsoot, in a satirist's complaint and a senator's letter about a quiet bedroom, in 50 million broken oil jars, and a tomb shaped like a bread oven. Tonight we have tried to give that second Rome its due. Half of every ancient life was lived in the dark, and almost none of our history is. And what did it amount to, the Roman art of night? Strip away the marble and the Latin, and look at the toolkit we've handled this evening. Warmth applied to tired muscles, a light supper and a watered cup, a walk after eating, running water within earshot, a few pages of something calming, an honest accounting of the day, a cool, dark, quiet, small room, and other human beings within call. There is not one item on that list that a sleep clinic of our own century would cross out, and several it would underline twice. The Romans had no neurology and no need of it. They had instead several thousand years of accumulated human practice, tested nightly, refined generation by generation, and administered by households that took rest as seriously as work. We are only now, with our wearable monitors and our blackout curtains, measuring our way back to conclusions their grandmothers could have recited. They were not primitive people enduring the dark. They were experts in it, and we are the ones relearning. But let the record of this gentle night stay honest to its last line. The quiet we have admired was a manufactured quiet, and the manufacturing was done by Felix, rolling up a pallet he was never asked if he wanted, by Thais, who banked the fire and woke before everyone, by Chloe and Hermes and Philon at the door. People whom the law of that beautiful, brutal civilization counted as instruments, and whom this episode has insisted on counting as people, because that is the one correction history most needs and least often gets. Their names here are inventions standing for millions whose real names are lost. Their care, their skill, their stolen minute at the moonlit colonnade, those are as real as anything in the sources, and more real than most of it. If the Roman night has a single lesson, it may be this. Every easy rest in every century is held up by somebody's work. The Romans knew it and rarely said it. We can do better by half we can say it. Here's the image I would leave you with, the one the whole evening has been resting on. The Tiber is still there. The wharves are gone. The barges are gone. The house on the Aventine is a garden over buried walls, but the river still runs through Rome tonight, this actual night, while you listen. And the moon still lays the same silver path across it that Lucius watched between his two sleeps, that Varus glanced at over his cooling loaves, that the helmsman steered by, and the sentry in Syria turned his face toward missing home. Moonlight on moving water may be the single most continuous human experience there is. No technology has improved it. No century has worn it out. Every generation has stood at some dark window and watched it and thought about the people they loved and the day behind them and the sleep ahead, which means that in the 1 hour of his life we would call most ordinary, the Roman nobleman was closest to being us, and we to him. The past is a foreign country at noon. At midnight, it is family. If tonight's journey stirred something, memories of kerosene lamps and banked coal stoves, of night shifts and watch rotations, of a grandmother who was always up first, or a house that went quiet in a particular way, I'd be honored if you shared it in the comments below. Whether you served on a midnight watch, worked the ovens or the wards or the press room while your city slept, or simply remember reading by flashlight under a blanket 60 years ago, your stories are the living end of the very long thread we followed tonight, and this channel exists for the people who hold it. A like or a subscribe helps these long, quiet journeys keep coming. And if there is a corner of the ancient night, or any other century's night, you want us to visit next, say the word. We read everything, usually by lamplight, out of professional respect. So, the lamps are quenched, the keys are hung, the accounts, all of them are settled, and the moon is keeping its old appointment over the Tiber. The Romans had a phrase for the deep of the night nox in tempesta, the timeless hour, the hour without business. May you find it tonight in your own small, dark, quiet room, on the other end of the longest thread there is. Sleep well, friends. The watch is kept, and I'll see you in the next one.